Hello guys, Dieter again. Finally, we got the new under us. He runs Superstitious Meadery in Arizona, USA, which is established in 2012. Welcome, Jeff Herbert. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Um, Tell me, how does an American start a Meadery in Arizona?
That's a good question. So I was working as a firefighter, actually retired from the Phoenix Fire Department in
Yeah.
December with 20 years in the fire service. And a lot of firemen have side jobs. So I was going through graduate school and promoting at work, became a paramedic and an engineer. And then I just kept asking myself, what would I like to do for something else in life? And so I looked at some different options, but I kept coming back to having a brewery or even a meadery because a friend of mine introduced me to home brewing. And I kept talking about it. And actually, on my 10-year wedding anniversary, went to Belgium and I first drank a Chimay Blue I don't know if it's there anymore, but there was a brew pub like on the Grand Place in Brussels. And my wife and I were there and I was like, oh, what's a local beer? And the guy gave me one. And I just kept talking about it. I'm like, this is amazing. And I got home a few months later on Father's Day. I get home from the fire station, and my wife had bought a homebrew kit for me. So I just kept homebrewing. I got so into it. I started making mead right away. I got into cider a little bit later, and I started asking myself the question, like any homebrewer does, could I ever have a brewery, mead or cider? And started to learn about all of the different laws that go into that, and like probably a lot of your fans that are listening right now and our customers, like I'm a craft beer tourist. I love to travel. We had little kids at the time, and it turns out that a brew pub is perfect for family because they always have pretzels and a root beer and coloring things for kids. So we were always hitting up craft beer bars, and whenever I had the chance, or at least brew pubs, I would try and ask a question or two to a brewer, someone that worked there, and just I started taking notes. And a year and a half after I started home brewing, I took a class in Chicago at the Siebel Institute. So the Siebel Institute in Chicago, as well as University of California, Davis, are the two most renowned places to learn how to become a master brewer in America. And I wasn't able to do the master brewer program. It was really expensive, and you had to live in Germany, and seemed like an awesome program. But they had a class that was only 3 days long, and it was called How to Start a Brewery. And I went and took this class, and I knew the least out of anyone in the class. And there were 40 people from Alaska to Panama, from Canada. Some people even already had breweries. And the first question they said is, all right, everyone in this room, who here is an award-winning home brewer? But me raised their hand. And I looked at the guy next to me and I said, they have awards for this shit? Like sitting in my house in Arizona, brewing, and I really didn't have a connection to the craft beer world as a whole. I would, of course, drink craft beer over, like a Miller or a Budweiser, but I was just doing my own thing, man. And trying to make Belgian beers at home was like half of what I brewed. And then, meads were probably like 10% because, I mean, my favorite beer to this day is like a Rochefort 10 or Westy 12, like that Belgian dark strong ale. And, that's like $5 or $6 for one bottle in America. And I figured as a home brewer, I could make that for like $1.50, right, in ingredients. So I was always trying to do, doubles and triples and Belgian dark strong ales. And anyways, that just, like, I just got so into it. And I got back from the Siebel, and I started writing a business plan. And it could have kind of went like the brewery direction or the meadery direction. And my wife really liked the idea too. And we decided to sell our house where we were living at the time outside of Phoenix, which is like the fifth biggest city in America. It's still small compared to like New York or whatever. But, with all the towns around Phoenix, there's probably 4.5 million people. And it's a really fun place to be a firefighter because we'd have lots of exciting calls. But we decided to move to this small town of Prescott, Arizona. So right now I'm talking to you from our tasting room. We're on this historic courthouse square of this beautiful mountain town that is, about maybe 1,600 meters high. So we have seasons and snow, and it's nice in the summer. It's really just a perfect place to raise a family and for us to start a business. So we went to the closest winery uh, just 4 weeks after we moved to town. I brought some homebrew mead with me, and the owners of this winery said, "You guys should make your mead here." And I said, "It's funny that you're offering that, because I was just about to start looking for a very small commercial space in town to like make beer or mead. I wasn't sure." So we wound up becoming really good friends with this older couple. They allowed us to rent a very small space, enough room for 2 barrels wide. That's, I mean, nothing. And we started the first alternating proprietorship in Arizona. That's where a separate licensed winery rents space from another. So with just $10,000 on one credit card and 4 barrels, we started our business in 2012. We were the smallest winery in the state. We made 300 gallons of mead and cider our first year. And then 2 expansions later, a couple of loans later, by 2017, we had made more legally wine, right, but mead and hard cider, than any winery in the history of our state. We became the biggest winery in Arizona 5 years after we opened.
But you also make wine or winery, as in we make mead under a wine brewing license?
Right, so in America, if you're a brewery, you have to use cereal grains in your products. And you can also use fruits and herbs and hops and honey and all, barrels, of course. But in America, if you're a winery, you're not allowed to use cereal grains. So that's how they divide us and how they regulate us and how we pay taxes. So all the rules are different. They're similar, but legally we're a winery. So we can use grapes, and we are now actually making wine. We're about to release our first wine ever, which is going to be an orange wine, which is popular in Northern Europe, and it's just starting to catch on here in America. So that'll be fun, but we've got a Zinfandel in barrels, a Cab about to go in barrels. We're going to do white wine next year, but that's a very small amount of our production. And like I said, until, say, maybe a month or 2 from now, we've never released a wine. We even did a hard seltzer for fun, but almost like about half of what we do really is hard cider, and the other half is mead. And we do session meads in cans. We do accessible, like, traditional hard ciders, but then we actually have the highest rate of hard cider in the world on Untapped and Rate Beer, and it's a blueberry hard cider called Blueberry Spaceship Box. It looks like purple champagne, and it tastes just like what you would think. Like, I love the traditional ciders of, Normandy and Asturias and other great regions with great cider apples and wild yeast. I appreciate the hell out of it. But I always feel like you have to use your imagination a little bit to try and find some of those really interesting qualities. And so I didn't want to compete with those perfect ciders of the world. Yeah. I thought, well, let's do something different with cider. Let's use other fruits in the fermentation. And for lack of a better term, we say that we make fruit ciders, and they are just so delicious. And the market has responded very positively to that.
Was that also a choice you had to make, like, or I start brewing beer then, or I start mead and wine? How did you make that choice? Was it kill your darling, or?
That too. That's a nice reference to one of my favorite writers. I like that. But it was a hard choice, because I mean, to this day, I know I obviously know a lot about mead, but I still probably know more about different kinds of beers today than I do meads. So yeah, it was a hard choice. Now, in our state and in most states, you are allowed to have a brewery and a winery on the same premises. You can share the same bottling equipment, and that's always been, it's not even in the back of my mind, it's always been like a possibility of, would we do Superstition Brewery? And right now, it doesn't make sense, because we have a system in place. We're growing very aggressively, our mead and cider business. And one day we might make beer, but in the meantime, I just have to go collab with my friends around the world and make beer on their system. So we're still, besides the current state that we're in right now as a country, normally either myself or some of our staff would be doing a collab at least once a month somewhere.
Okay, tell me a bit about the size of your mead winery. What is the volume? What is the staff? The size of.
And all of our staff that normally would work here. Then we have our production facility, which is 3,750 square feet. I'm not sure, we have to divide by 9 or so for meters, but our ceilings go probably 4 meters high, 5 meters high. We have, big tanks just like you'd see in a brewery. We've got what's probably it's definitely one of the biggest barrel aging programs in the history of mead. We have about 150 to 200 barrels in service at any one time. And then we have our sales folks. And so we have 3 full-time sales reps in Arizona. We have a director of sales. And so all told, 29 folks. We made 36,000 gallons of product last year. So we're talking something like just over 1,000 barrels of beer, which is really, really small when you compare us to a lot of breweries out there. Certainly small when you compare us to wineries, but there are a lot of small boutique wineries around. I mean, there's over 10,000 wineries now in the U.S. And I actually just read a national report, and we're actually kind of in the middle as far as production averages go for wine. But as a meadery, we're actually very big. I mean, I think we could be in the top 5 to 10, maybe more, as far as like the volume of mead that we make. And then when you look at cider, there are definitely many larger cider companies than us. I mean, Angry Orchard, that's owned by the Boston Beer Company, Sam Adams, they've got over 50% of the market share for cider in America. I mean, they're like, you can get a tap handle of Angry Orchard anywhere. So we'll never be there and don't have to be. But as far as cider production, I think that we're actually probably on a list somewhere. I don't know, but it's kind of funny. I've been way more involved with the mead industry as a whole. My wife and I, who are the only owners of our company, we're also founding members of our national industry organization called the American Mead Makers Association. Okay. And we have introduced legislation to the U.S., Congress, Senate, House of Representatives. We've been involved politically as much as we can. So anyways, I've definitely been proud to take a leadership role in our industry from like the very beginning of when I started my company.
Yeah, I remember one of the first times that I got into mead was a talk a couple of years ago with the Swedish craft brewers also, and they said that mead is going to be the next big thing, together / after craft beer, because it's the most sold alcohol shipped from Europe now to the USA, except beer, of course. How is that trend coming or picking up, or is that true?
Well, I think that mead is definitely growing very fast. I used to do our national industry report, and I did that for a few years. And we made the statement 2 years ago, the last time I did one, that mead is the smallest but fastest growing sector of the U.S. alcohol industry. So the thing about our industry that's important to put into context is that there's no such thing as a company that has ever come in with millions of dollars and built a meadery, like you see in the brewing world, the winemaking world, the distilling world, even in cider. It just hasn't happened. It's all a group of everyone's independent, small entrepreneurs that oftentimes do everything right. You start a business, maybe you build something, next to your house, or you rent a small industrial space. We're talking really creative people coming up with ways to follow all the rules and create a company, create a delicious product, introduce it to the market. And you are more likely to meet the owner of a meadery than probably any other alcohol company when you're actually purchasing product, because those are the people that are, hand selling it at farmers markets and craft beer bars and whatnot everywhere. And we were no exception. Like I told you, we started as small as we possibly could. And now we've become one of the bigger producers in the world for this, with a lot of hard work and great staff and creativity. But yeah, mead's growing really fast, but it's growing kind of flat. And what I mean by that is there is no just big money, giant producers coming in, which is kind of cool, because the opportunities for us in the industry are up to us, right? It's up to me to decide how we're going to grow this. And it's up to my friends in the industry to decide how are we going to grow the mead industry. And people have been working together like never before. And we did the very first meadery to meadery collaboration in the history of the world. It happened to be international with our friends from Wales at Mabinogion Meadery. We did the first domestic meadery to meadery collaboration ever in the U.S.
Cool.
and those guys are great. So we've been trying to get the meat industry to come together, to work together, to share certain information about like what is working for all of us, right? And so yeah, I think that long story short, the meat industry it's here to stay once and for all. And I think in a few years, any single person that at least knows of craft beer will know what mead is. You're going to start to see tap handles. Maybe it's just one tap handle at the end of an IPA line somewhere with some stouts, right? But it's becoming more and more common, and mead is just the most delicious beverage that most people still are unaware of. And it's my job, as my business card says, I'm the mead ambassador, and
Yeah.
that's my job, is to introduce the world to mead.
How is if I look into Belgium, where I'm from, if I go to the more regular shops for brewing equipment, you find 3 to 4 meat yeast strains. How is that in Arizona, America? Is it when you go to brewing equipment for as a hobby brewer, you find 20, 50 different types of yeast and ingredients? Is it already way more professionalized?
All right, so the truth is there's no such thing as a mead yeast, okay? So you can use ale yeast, you can use
Hmm.
wine yeast, and most commonly we're using a strain of wine yeast. So we only have
Okay.
two sort of proprietary things at our company, and it's how we make our very famous White Series line of meads, and then our yeast, because I worked really hard as a home brewer, and even in the beginning years of being commercial, experimenting with, dozens and dozens of yeasts, and I finally found something that I really love, and now it's produced commercially just for us in a special package, and I think it really sets our style apart from other meads that are out there. And originally it was from a wine yeast strain. So I would talk
Okay.
to any home brewer and say, think about making a red wine or a white wine, because if you're making a traditional mead and it's just honey, water, and yeast, probably a white wine yeast will work really well for you. And if you're using different fruits, especially like red fruits, cherries, wine grapes, think about using maybe a red wine yeast. But we've also used ale yeast, and we've used ale yeast stacked with wine yeast with great results. So there's a lot of ways to do it, and I can get into some of the things you need to think about in mead making to make that a reality. But yeah, that's kind of the long story of the yeast deal. Now, if you go to White Lab's website, they will list a couple of different mead yeast and cider yeast, and that's cool. And that just means people are using them for that now, so that's great.
Yeah. Very shortly to go a little bit more into that. By beer, we have barrel aged. We have people using wooden chips. There is a wine barrel, rum barrel aged. How is that in the meat scene? Let's start you with your water, your honey, and your yeast, and what type of ingredients or influences are commonly done or trending.
Cool. So to answer your first question, we've used bourbon barrels, brandy barrels, Sauterne barrels, Madeira barrels, port barrels, beer barrels. Mead barrels. Yeah, so we use all kinds of oak. I am a barrel geek, and barrels and mead are a perfect pairing. And we are constantly experimenting with that. Now, once you pick out your honey and your yeast, and honestly, I've never had a bad honey. There's weird honeys for sure. There's delicious honeys. There's really dark ones, really light ones. Whatever it is that you're picking, and a local honey is probably going to be a great choice. Picking a wine yeast is probably a great choice. But the thing that you really have to do differently than in most styles of brewing or winemaking is manage your fermentation. If you have access to oxygen, that's really helpful. If you don't, just stirring your must during fermentation is going to be important. You'll introduce a bit of oxygen that way,
Okay.
but you're also degassing. So when the yeast cell comes in contact with the sugar molecule, it's going to create the magic of alcohol, but it's also going to create CO2 and esters and phenols, these aromas and flavor compounds that, if the yeast is happy and healthy in an ideal environment, will all be delicious and amazing. And traditionally, going back years, people really didn't know how to do this so much. They definitely didn't do it with mead making and in many forms of fermentation. And so people would make a traditional mead, and the must, the unfermented mead, did not have enough nutrients for the yeast to be happy and healthy, so there would be off flavors. And you have to wait months or a year or so for those flavors to go away and fade. And you could try and hide them with more sugar or fruit or different things. But anyways, Nowadays, everyone that makes commercial mead that tastes good is managing their fermentation. So for the first third of fermentation, we're going to degas, which means stirring to get the bubbles out, right? We're going to add food grade oxygen to help the yeast grow the acrospore it needs in the first phase of the yeast life cycle, right? We're going to manage the pH, and we're going to add yeast nutrients. And you can get yeast energizer, yeast nutrients at any homebrew store, right? And then after 1/3 of fermentation, we stop adding oxygen, but we continue to degas every day and add nutrients every day for the first half of fermentation. And then we let the fermentation finish. And then we want to rack or pump. We want to get the mead off of, or cider, those dead yeast cells before autolysis begins. And that's another potential contributor of all flavors in fermentation. So as soon as fermentation's done, we're going to cold crash it, we're going to fine it, we're going to get it off of there, and then we can look at things that we'll do in secondary, and that could be, barrels or blending or whatever else we do.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, my first yeast I made was just like the water, the honey, the yeast in it, and but okay, yeah, way more complex than I thought it was. Cool, cool. Um, Also, honey, you mentioned it already. Is it, in my head, honey is like this product that price can variate a lot according to the season. It's also, I think, more a luxury product. How do you stay by consistent honey? Is it always locally available, the types you want to have consistent made? Or,
That's a really good question. So we use two kinds of honey in almost anything we do. Arizona wildflower honey, and wildflower honey means that the beekeeper had his bees going to lots of different nectar sources, or that he blended honeys, right? And then a varietal of honey, just like saying Cabernet grapes, for us would be in Arizona, the most common varietal honey is mesquite honey. And people think of mesquite and they think about like a Texas barbecue. Well, it's true that you make coals from mesquite trees, but mesquite honey is simply bees going to the blossoms of this desert tree that happens to make perfect charcoal, right? And we get a honey that has a nice hint of spice to it, just a little bit more
okay.
spicy than our wildflower honey. Now, we buy from the largest honey packer in the state. So Crockett's Honey in Tempe, Arizona, buys honey from beekeepers all over Arizona, and they actually have a guy, and his job is to blend honeys to make them taste the same, so that when they sell us a wildflower or mesquite, they're picking the right ingredients, or not ingredients, but like the right batches of honey to make the flavor consistent. So I knew, even going back years, that as I was going to grow this company, if I wanted to scale a product, I couldn't have the flavors being different every time, right? A
Uh,
little variation's okay, but yeah, I mean, you can't have Tahitian honeymoon and have the honey be different. I mean, that just wouldn't be the same thing. Now, whenever we have a chance to get a really interesting nectar sourced, varietal honey from a small local beekeeper, I'm always happy to do that. And we actually have one of the top rated traditional meads in the world called Super Bee that's made from ironwood honey that's really rare. I actually haven't been able to buy it for 2 years. And this honey was just amazing. And I remember entering this in the Mazer Cup, and we won a gold medal at the world's biggest mead competitions every year in Colorado. And I remember one of the judges' notes said, I have no idea what ironwood honey is supposed to taste like, but the meat's perfect. Good job.
uh, uh,
So,
uh,
so yeah, honey is really important, and there are some really unique honeys out there. And the most striking examples of that I've seen in Brazil. And I started a company that actually 2 days ago delivered its first packaged bottled products to the first two accounts in southern Brazil. So it's called Meadery. I started this company with a couple of business partners. We're now friends, and it's going amazing. But I went down to Brazil in February to officially launch our company at a festival in Rio de Janeiro. But before the Rio Fest, we went out into the Atlantic rainforest to hang out with a biologist and try honey from these bees that don't have stingers, called Melipona bees in the jungle. And it was honey unlike anything you've ever had before. I mean, the tropical fruit flavors that you taste it like you were like sipping on concentrated like papaya juice. It was crazy, and passion fruit. And so there are definitely some really, really interesting honeys out there, and it will change the way your mead tastes, just like a different grape will change the way a wine tastes, a different hop will change the way beer tastes.
is that also something you are aiming for? a lot in the future, like more batches with more hard to get honeys, yeast, like you have your fixed portfolio, but you also want to go back to smaller batches of experiments, or?
That's a good question. So I would say that we don't focus a lot of our attention on finding new honeys. We focus our attention on finding new fruit flavors, new barrels, and different types of vanilla beans, adjuncts, cacao nibs that we can use to create different flavors. Now, our very next release is actually a traditional mead, and it's called Mead Town, and we made it with our mayor, the guy in charge of our town here in Prescott, a year ago, because he named a day, Superstition Meadery Day, in honor of this business award we had won last year. So we invited the mayor to make a mead with us, and we chose a wildflower honey that was sourced from a mountain that you can see from our production facility. So you couldn't get more local. And we put that in an American oak barrel, and I can't wait for that to come out. I haven't actually tried it in, I don't know, 6 months, like, I don't know, right when it went into the barrel or something. So I can't wait to try this next week because our labels just got approved. So we do that, but we have a core line. We've got 4 meads and a cider that are our core products we try to never run out of. But that having been said, we've released over 260 different meads or ciders in 8 years. So we are always experimenting with small batches. And we're about to open the world's first mead and food pairing restaurant in Phoenix, which will be amazing, not just for our brand, but for the industry, because we're going to be able to introduce so many more people to what mead is, to what Superstition is doing. And I think that the small batch products we do, when we just have 1 barrel getting bottled, we're going to be able to sell those almost exclusively through what will be our 2 restaurants and our web store. And like those things probably won't get out too much to distribution compared to what we'll do in our own shops. But yeah, man, I mean, there's just so many new things. We got canned cider, canned mead, canned seltzer, those different wines, all different meads that are always coming. I mean, every week I can't believe this. It's like every single week we have at least 1 new release coming out without even trying anymore. We have so many barrels full of these amazing things aging. So yeah, that's a blast. You can tell like I'm passionate about, coming up with new stuff. So is our staff, and any single person that works for us. If they have an idea on a product they want to make, they can go make a test batch of production. I don't care what it costs. I mean, it might not be 1,000 gallons to start, it'll be small, but if it's delicious, then we'll scale it up. And that like spirit of working together, cooperation, and creativity is one of the things that has definitely defined the success of us as a company.
If you take the factor time, what does time do in the process of creating a good mead? Does it take longer, way longer? Do you have some barrel-aged projects of a couple of years to make it more consistent or special?
Absolutely. So we are capable of making a mead in 4 weeks. Never could have done that 8 years ago. It might not be the most complex or interesting thing for us. Most of our products are, even if they're not barrel aged, it's really 8 to 12 weeks at least for most of our higher ABV meads to come out. So a couple things happen when you age a mead. You're going to have, especially if there's different flavors and the different fruits or whatnot, sometimes those flavors integrate really well, depends on what they are, depends on the temperature and lots of factors. Sometimes it takes more time for those flavors to integrate. Sometimes you want something to really stand out. Like when we use hops or coffee in a mead, we want to make that and have people enjoying it as soon as it comes out. But if we're doing something with wine grapes and honey and it goes into a barrel, the time it takes to come together, even before it gets in the barrel, the time it spends in that barrel, and then even once it's in a bottle, through that whole process, at some point, you're inadvertently introducing a bit of oxygen, called oxidation. If you're very careful and you do it right and use very high quality, bottling equipment and the best corks like we do, then all of those things are going to come together and create something that will age like any fine wine or like a really great stout, for example. So there's a lot of factors that come into play. So yeah, we can do things pretty quick and make them delicious, but there is definitely this magic that happens when you throw something in a barrel. And one of the cool stories, I'm drinking this Lagermas de Oro right now. So this is Arizona mesquite honey and water and yeast, and that's it. But we put this into a freshly dumped bourbon barrel. And then what we do is we'll usually make 16 to 18 barrels at a time when we make a batch of Lagermaster Oro. And then we'll take the very best barrel, and we will take that and put that liquid into another freshly dumped bourbon barrel. We've now done that 4 times, and we've got this 2-year-old project that will wind up being released as a 22 to 24% ABV mead, where you can smell and taste the bourbon and the wood and the vanilla that comes out of all that wood, but it's actually super smooth because, it's not 40% or it's not barrel strength bourbon. So if you're someone that likes the flavor of bourbon, like as an accent in a bourbon barrel aged stout, for example, you're going to love what we're making here. And you just can't, I think we'll keep making it, but when you keep putting things into different barrels, you're never going to be able to perfectly duplicate that. So when you mentioned consistency, the things that are not barrel aged that we do, and even the things that most of the time we do, that we find a very high level of consistency. But that's not our goal when we're doing something crazy, like putting something in 4 different barrels, or double barrel aging things, or when we have our barrel aging program, we'll exchange barrels with breweries, and they will do beer that ages in mead barrels that they may never be able to make again. And it's super exciting to have those one-off special products, I think.
Cool. Let's dive more into the image of mead. Is it in the States then? Is it a difficult product to sell towards bars and restaurants, a bit outside of the craft and geek scene? Is it for your average Joe? Is it an accessible product? Is it a luxury product? How is it the product in the market?
Question. So if you were to look at the mead industry, you could simplify and say there's 2 kinds of mead. You have session mead, that it's under 10% alcohol, usually under 7, and in a can. So that could be positioned like an IPA or double IPA, anywhere from $1.50 or $2 for a 12-ounce can, up to say, $6 for a 16-ounce can, depending on the flavors and everything that goes into there. And so that's the kind of thing that could be in a grocery store, that you could have as a daily drinker, as a craft beer fan. And then you have what some people say your wine style meads, like our higher ABV barrel aged meads, and then you are looking at most definitely a premium to ultra premium product. And we sell bottles of mead anywhere from $12 to $15 all the way up to $100 for a 375 is our most expensive super rare thing that comes out every couple of years. So there's a huge array, just like the wine world. You can go to a wine shop and spend $3 or $4 for a wine, and if you happen to be in Spain or Italy, it might actually taste good for $4 or $5, right, if it's local. Or you could spend thousands of dollars for wine. There aren't very many meads that cost hundreds or thousands of dollars, but anyways, there's this huge array. So when you get outside of the craft beer world, it becomes increasingly challenging to sell mead because the familiarity of that person and their customer is less and less and less. The further that you get away from a tasting room experience, where our staff is so well trained and can talk to you and tell you all about our company and the product and the ingredients and why it's valuable, once you get over to that bottle shop and someone happens to walk by a shelf and just pick up a bottle of mead and like, oh, okay, here's a label, it costs $20, $30, I don't know what this is, it becomes more challenging to make a sale. So your artwork, your graphic design has to speak for itself, and we do everything we can to train people. But we're seeing that change fast. So the best example of that is we got into Costco, which is one of the biggest stores. Do you have any Costco's around you? Have you ever been to one of those?
Nope.
So they're international, but there's I think 400 or 500 Costco's in America. So it's like a giant warehouse, and you often buy things in bulk. So you would buy like a huge thing of toilet paper, dog food, meat, but they also sell like furniture and stuff. So they have a great alcohol selection. And they have a very inexpensive pricing scheme because it's a private club. You have to pay to be a member of a Costco to shop there. And then they have a very small margin they add to their alcohol. So it's a whole different experience than going to a bottle shop. I mean, there's no one there to help you or answer questions. But if you know what you want, it's great, right? So anyways, we got into Costco in Arizona with our cider in December. and they bought one pallet, and now they're looking at buying 15 to 20 pallets a month. And we got mead into Costco last week. So that is super mainstream. And it's an amazing indicator, I hope, of what's to come for us and the mead industry. Because if you have bottles of mead in a place like Costco, you can have bottles of mead anywhere.
Yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, and yeah, product-wise also, is it like some meats, are they like whiskeys already? Like you buy the bottle now, it's a very rare one, the price goes up. Is there already
Yes, there,
speculation on the meat?
so it's definitely not at the level of what you see with, especially say trading for bourbons and whiskeys, or even wine connoisseurs. But a there is a small group of dedicated mead fans that definitely have created a secondary market where you see some of those crazy prices. There are definitely rare things that we release and other meaderies release that are sought after. The people bottle shares or trade for other beers. So yeah, that is one aspect, probably one of the smallest aspects of our industry. But it's also important because when you have certain products that become hyped, people are excited about, it does that aspect helps elevate the industry to the level that we see with craft beer and sometimes wine and spirits.
Yeah, 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 understood. Is there also already meat festivals, or is that like blending into the beer craft scene where you get, let's say, an extra stage for meat, or is meat festival and events wise separate?
So the answer is yes and yes. So fortunately for us, we've been invited to every McKellar event for the last 5 years in Japan, and Boston, and Copenhagen. And the fact that Mikkel is able to put mead on that world platform of being one of the best beverages in the world is just awesome. It's done so much for the mead industry, I think, where people who are the most hardcore beer fans in the world get to see mead and some of our cider standing on its own against the very best craft beverages in the world. And so at festivals like that, you're starting to see more and more meaderies. Sometimes there's 4 or 5 mead producers out of, say, 50 to 100 breweries. But yes, there are mead festivals now. Of course, they're all canceled at the moment. But like Meeting in the Garden was supposed to happen a few weeks ago. It's the biggest mead festival in the West Coast. And I think they were looking at 40 to 50 mead and cider producers in one space, no beer. So that's really unique. And we sent staff out to it last year, and we were going to send staff this year. And it's really popular, a couple thousand people going around just drinking mead. Even Arizona has a mead and cider festival that happens once a year. The biggest mead event of the year anywhere in the world is at the Mazer Cup. So the Mazer Cup is the world's largest commercial mead competition. And the competition itself is not open to the public. But there are some really cool events that happen around it. There's a mead mixer on like the Friday night before, and you buy a ticket to that, and that's basically a mead festival. And you may have 40 different meaderies from all over the world pouring for hours, and there's a couple other events they do too. So yeah, it's becoming a thing, and one of our goals is to help get a mead festival going in the next year or two in Europe through our Malmo Mead Network. So one of the things we did is we helped establish a distribution company, very, very small, in Malmo, Sweden. So we have product in a warehouse there right now, and we're doing this in partnership with our friends that own Malmo Brewing and Malmo Meadery. And so we've already sent product to 7 countries in Europe through the system. And as it grows, we'd like to eventually bring in other meaderies and also have perhaps a traveling mead festival around Europe.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question. How it is in terms of import-export? I heard that Sweden and those countries export a lot of meat towards the United States, but I assume your product, what is the percentage that is shipped outside the US?
For us, it's only 5% of our business is export. And my personal goal as a business owner is to always make more money from export than we spend on travel. So far we've been able to do that. And it's a good excuse, So, because I love traveling, meeting other people. I love going to festivals and trying to speak other languages and the culture. And we've been able to send our staff to Brazil and Europe. It's amazing the opportunities that we've created, for my wife and I as owners of Superstition, but also for our staff to travel the country and travel the world. And all of us are constantly following our mission to reintroduce the world's oldest fermented beverage to mankind. And the only way to do that is to get out there and travel and talk to people and pour them a glass of mead.
You already mentioned that you're also founding member of the mead legislation panel in the United States. What is industry-wise one of the biggest challenges or threats towards the sector of mead in the US?
That's a really good question. There's a couple of things I would change if I had my way. The first thing I would change is the bubble tax. So this sounds crazy, and we all have our own crazy alcohol laws, but I can make a cider with just apples or pears, and I can spend, just pennies a gallon on the tax, federally, for example. But if I put one vanilla bean in 1,000 gallons of cider, all of a sudden I have to spend $2.30 a gallon as a carbonated wine tax. So the bubble tax is something that prevents us from making products that can compete in, say, the craft beer space, because that's one issue. Another thing that's kind of crazy is laws are typically written not necessarily to prevent one group from doing something, but to specifically allow a group to do something. So most of the laws that we have to follow were written by and for the wine industry. So if I make a Cabernet wine, I can say where the grapes come from. I can say that the grapes are Cabernet grapes. But if I put one drop of honey in there, I can't tell you where the grapes came from or what kind of grapes they are. I'm only allowed to say that it's made from red wine grapes or red grapes, whatever the government will allow. So that's really frustrating. And the answer from the government is, well, you would be deceiving the customer by violating the federal rules if you told them where the grapes come from and I said, no, it's the exact opposite. We're telling them exactly what they are. That's all we want to do is be transparent and share our pride in sourcing these, special types of grapes or honeys. We're not supposed to say where our honey comes from. Sometimes they'll allow it. So if we can change the rules to be able to say things on a label just to reflect what's actually in there, that would be really good for us to help define the industry. And like I said, when someone's walking down a bottle shop aisle and they see this cool label and they start reading it, we want to be able to say what's in there. And we have to be really creative about how we do that right now. So one thing we did, my wife and I were named the best small business people in America by the Small Business Administration last year. And that status has allowed us to meet some really helpful people in the US government. And one of those people introduced us and the legislative arm of the American Mead Makers Association to the two top lawyers for the SBA, and their boss is Donald Trump. And that's amazing, right? They report directly to the president, the head of the SBA anyways, the administrator. And so anyways, you got these lawyers, their boss, and then the president. So we were able to take what we've worked on for years as mead industry and have these lawyers recommend to the federal agency that regulates all alcohol that mead should have its own category. And we hopefully will find out in September if that's going to happen. Sake is doing that successfully now, and we're hoping to follow what they're doing. And that should allow us to, in some ways, be able to say more of what is actually in a bottle on the labels and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned already the way people look to the product. What is the evolution when you started brewing mead? It was way more difficult to sell it, I assume.
You know what? In some ways, it's more difficult. I guess in the beginning, but really it's the same, because when I started our company, there was no one making mead in Arizona. There was no one selling Arizona mead because it didn't exist. And so I got a lot of no's, and I still get a lot of no's when I'm out there doing things. And our sales reps have to have really thick skin and have to learn all of the different techniques that work and don't work and how to sell mead. So it's easier because we've we know what doesn't work and we know what works, but it's still the same because I hear the same resistance from our distributors and our salespeople all the time. And they say, it's expensive. No one knows what it is. Why should we sell it? And then I say, well, one, it's the most delicious thing that your customers have never had. Two, with an ultra premium product comes ultra premium margins. Like we have all these answers, right? And the
Yeah.
whole thing is they just have to try it. And so getting someone to try it and to say, hey, look, these guys over here, they're being super successful with this cider, with this mead, whether it's kegs. We know how to tell bars how to sell it. Like we have these flights. So when you come into our place, you've got this beautiful flight board, and our biggest product is a flight of 12 different meads, 1 ounce in each glass, $24. So it's like getting 2 glasses or a little over of wine, but of 12 different flavors. And you get to share it, if you're on a date or whatever. So you just have to get people to try it. And it's really important that people know that trying one mead doesn't mean that's what all mead is. Imagine if you tried a Bud Light and you thought that's what every beer tasted like, So really our range is huge. And so that's another thing that works for us. That's super important, is letting people try a dry mead that's got bourbon in it, like I'm drinking right now, all the way through our range up to like really sweet, crazy things in the end that'd be great for dessert. So I don't know, that's kind of how it goes. And when people say, oh yeah, I know it's expensive and this, I'm like, yeah, I've been hearing that from the beginning. And yes, it is. And it's expensive for a reason. It's delicious. It's fantastic. And you just got to let your folks try it. You can use it in cocktails. It lasts longer than wine once it's open. There are all these great reasons to bring mead into your portfolio as a bar, a restaurant, a bottle shop. And you just have to, get that exposure and that education. And so we've taken that huge challenge that no one knows what it is, and it's expensive. Those are our big challenges. We've turned that into our greatest asset, and that's that we are able to define an industry. When our staff shares a story about how we made something with a customer in our bar, they're creating an experience, and they're transforming that person from what they used to drink into a crossover drinker, where now they're gonna, want to take a bottle of mead home and then share that story with their friends and family.
Yeah. To pick on the business side a little bit more, you and your company, how is it to do business in the way that, do you know the most of your customers? Is there always a bond, a click, or is it the bigger you become, the more commercial that you know people from the name on the contracts more? Is the personal touch with the customer still always there, or does that grow out of the company?
I'd say it grows in both directions. So in our tasting room and in what will be our Phoenix restaurant, we are creating that bond personally, one-on-one, with more and more people every single day. That's only getting bigger. And as we open up more retail outlets, wherever they may be, that will only get bigger as a trend, right? However, we're also getting into, more grocery stores, more bottle shops, and we're reaching more people that have never had a mead or a cider that don't know our brand. And so it's growing in that direction exponentially every day as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Are there any, you as a brewer then, Jeff, are there any don'ts, like not even on my grave that I will do this in a brew?
Wow, that's a good question. So we've used chili peppers in a couple of our meads, and I always like to have, I like the earthiness. I like a little bit of heat. I like it balanced though. So I will probably never make like a chili pepper mead that tastes like you're,
Spicy one.
drinking a habanero pepper, because I would never want to drink a whole glass of that. But that is a popular thing that you see, and that's called a capsamel as far as a style of mead. And so when we make those, I kind of balance that. I'm trying to think of something else I wouldn't do. I probably won't do, so we do certain dry meads, but you probably won't see us come out with a dry session mead. I don't care for those myself. You need a certain amount of sweetness when you have something under 10%, in my opinion, even if there's other fruits in there, which could be contributing some sweetness to make it taste really good. There's sort of like a diet soda, seltzery, carbonic acid thing you get when you have like a dry session mead. So for me, that's not my style. But again, there's people that are being really successful with that in the market. And I try and make something, whenever I make something, in almost every case, it's something I would want to drink for a particular occasion. So those are probably a couple directions I wouldn't go in, but we are doing crazy full flavored session meads, and we are doing dry meads, but like the dry mead I was just drinking, was 15% ABV with those bourbon notes, and so you've got like some mouthfeel. It stands up to that ABV, and it's it's just so satisfying.
All right. Jeff, Herbert, thanks a lot. You really showed me the passion for meat.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun talking with you, and thanks for helping me tell our story to more people.
Yeah. All right. See you.
All right, take care.